What's up, everybody? Corey used Bloody History. So, I didn't even realize it'd been a bunch of days since I did an episode. I've been so busy. But we're going to continue on with the testimony of Lillian Murret today. But let me just comment real quick, and I'm going to try not to go off on a tangent or be too much of a dick. But, Jesus Christ. The typical CIA shills like Jefferson Morley are out there fucking pushing this new 2,400 documents allegedly that they found. Look, let me make something really fucking clear. They're going to give you a shit ton of new documents on Cuba and a bunch of irrelevant shit. Okay? You're not getting Jack Valenti's hidden files. You're not getting David Morales' hidden files. You're not getting anything about Ted Shackley or George Ioannidis or the JM Wave guys that were in Dealey Plaza that day. You're not getting any of that stuff. You're not getting any Oswald's tax records, Robert's tax records, Robert's Marine records. You're not getting any of that stuff. You're definitely not getting Marguerite Oswald's naval history that goes back to 1941. Okay? We're not getting any of that stuff. We're not getting her involvement in the Waves program, which is yet to be confirmed, but I know it happened because she admitted she was a telephone operator for the Navy. And at the time, telephone operators for the Navy went through the Waves program. So we have none of those documents. Okay? So all these people out there who are telling their audiences and their communities that they're getting new documents, like, are the dumbest people in the world. Okay? Now, if I wake up in a week or two and I have the 986-page Marguerite Oswald Office of Naval Intelligence file that goes back to at least 1941, then I will fucking get on the biggest platform in the world and admit I was wrong. Okay? Until I have that Marguerite Oswald 986-page file, which is, in my opinion... See, I'm past the assassination, right? We've already solved the assassination, right? We know who the shooters were. We know it was Israel. Now, it's the sandwich material in between that other people are still going to try to figure out, but I really believe is not overly relevant to anything at this point in time other than the connections to Jack Valenti, which are the only thing I really care about. So, yeah, I'm really just not convinced at all that we're getting anything worthwhile because they never give us anything worthwhile. And so Trump is going to come out and say that this disgraced FBI and CIA, and he's going to shit on all of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies, and I just don't see it happening, okay? We're definitely not getting any material that shows there were body doubles. We're not getting anything on Oswald's original school records with all of them, because if you had them all, you would, I mean, including the schools we don't know about, then we're not getting any of that stuff. We're just not getting any of it. Okay, so I don't know what the fuck people are getting excited about. This is when you go through the last document releases, they've been worthless. Okay, nobody's really talked about this, but all of the documents that have been released since 2017 have been worthless. Zero. Most of them are duplicates of shit that's already been out. Ryan Dawson made a big deal that Trump released a document about Homer Echevarria, saying that the Jews are our backers now, right? That's not a new document. Okay, I've got that from a 1967 fucking report. Okay, so no documents from 2017 onward that we've gotten have had any value. None. Literally none. Okay, so I don't know what fucking people think. They're just getting jerked off here. Okay. So, we were talking about Lillian Murret, and I was saying that this paragraph here was really fucking problematic. Okay, and we're going to spend some time on just this paragraph here, just before we move on. Because there's so much wrong with it, it's unfucking believable. All right? So, she's talking about how she got a job with the same hosiery people that she worked for in New York. So, here we are. Mr. Jenner is asking Mrs. Murret questions. And he's asking about that job. And she says, yes, it was the same people. But Lee didn't want to go to school over there. He was sort of a problem by not going to school. And one day, when she was at work, they came to the apartment and they got him. And they took him off and put him in this place. And she had to get a lawyer. And the lawyer got him out of that place. And he told her that she had better get out of New York as fast as she could with this boy. And that's all I know about the story. Let me pause right here. This is fantastic. What does this tell us? This tells us that her lawyer told Marguerite Oswald that by the time he got out of the youth house, which was May 7th, they need to get the hell out of New York as soon as possible. Because he knew they were going to abscond with Lee and take him off to one of the houses, like, permanently. So he's like, get the hell out. This adds credence to the North Dakota story, which we already know is true because of the admission to Eileen Mosby, the reporter, and the statements of the people who knew him in North Dakota. So it definitely happened. It's not even a question of whether it happened or not. It's also, see, this is great because it helps put into perspective that this isn't Lee. This is Harvey, right? She's dealing with Harvey. But she trips up her statements here. Because over the timing. And we'll get to that here coming up. All right, so then it says, and then it must have been on the way back. I didn't even know she had went to New York. So she's saying she didn't know she was gone to New York between August of 52 and January of 54. So allegedly she didn't talk to her for all that time. I don't buy that for a second. Anyway, she must have come back looking for a place here to stay in New Orleans, and she came to my house, and we put her up for I don't know how long. It was during that time that Robert was getting out of the Marines, because Robert met her at my house after she had been staying there a couple of weeks or a month or whatever it was, and they all went back to Texas, and I didn't hear from them for a while. All right, so Robert got out of the Marines in July of 55, and I knew that's what happened. I fucking knew that was what happened, and this confirms it. Robert brought them back to Texas in July of 55 is what she's saying here. But we know that's not true. We know that Marguerite worked in New York. Worked in New Orleans until July 31st, 1956, because we have that on her work report as per John Armstrong. John Armstrong was able to discern that she worked until July 31st. Even though Oswald put on his school records that he moved to Fort Worth July 1st, that's not true. It's July 31st because we know that Marguerite Oswald worked in New Orleans until then. But here, what she's saying is that Robert in July 55 took them back to Texas. He got a car, loaded them up, and went and took them back. Right? He's adamant it's July 55. That's confirmed that he was out of the Marines in July of 55. So this is problematic because they didn't leave till July 31st of 1956, which is over a year later. But see, this is problematic also because we know for a fact that in September of, was it September? No, it would have been September of the 1954 to 1955 school year that Harvey Oswald, was at Stripling in Fort Worth, right? So when was that? What did I just say? Did I just say September of 54? Is that what I just said? Yeah, I said September of 54, which is when he was at Stripling. Harvey Oswald at Stripling, right? So this coming back in July of 55 and taking them back doesn't make any sense at all. Why she's lying about it, I don't know. What this means, I don't know. What it tells me is she doesn't have the story. She wasn't briefed on the accurate story. That's it. That's all this means. She was not briefed on what really happened, and she fucked everything up. Mr. Jenner then says, let me interrupt you here for a minute, Mrs. Murret. I'll get back to that again in a moment. According to your story, when Ekdahl died, they remained in Texas until they went to New York. Is that right? Well, I imagined that was after she separated and after Robert graduated from high school. I assume that was the time she went to New York. I don't know if I'm right on that or not. Does the late summer of 52 refresh your recollection as to when she went to New York? 1952? Yes, 1952. When she went to New York. Well, she was living here. Let's see. Mr. Jenner says, well, she was living in Fort Worth before going to New York, I believe. Do you think that would have been in the summer of 1952? I can't recollect that. Maybe if you give me a lead, I might remember. She's asking to be led because she doesn't fucking know the stuff. Is the name of Ewing Street in Fort Worth, Texas, familiar to you? No, I don't know that one. Does 8th Avenue refresh your recollection as to any address that they lived in Fort Worth? I never heard from her at that address unless that was the house that she bought. She's talking about Victor Street. And she was having trouble with the party that bought it. You mean she was having trouble with the purchaser? Yes, he was supposed to pay rent to her. You see, she always wanted to do everything herself. Oh, no, she's not. No, what she's talking about. She's talking about the Alvar property. But this is way back before. She's screwing up. See, I know this because she's talking about he was supposed to pay rent to her, right? So that was the deal because it wasn't Dr. Mancuso. It was the other guy who moved in after her. And he started off paying her rent. And then she had trouble with him, and then he ended up purchasing it full price, right? So she's referring back to something that happened in 1947 or 48, when we're talking about 1952, right? So the fuck is she talking about? Yes, he was supposed to pay rent to her. You see, she always wanted to do everything herself, and he wasn't paying her the rent, and I don't think they was paying the other, and they lost out on the deal. But see, that doesn't make sense because that house was done. That house was sold. So, and she's not talking about Victor Street. We got the documentation on Victor Street. Unless she's talking about the Ewing place and had rented out the Ewing place before having sold it, which I have no knowledge of. And I need to point out, we don't have a single fucking contract, lease agreement, rent check, name, anything connected to any property that she ever owned, that she ever allegedly rented to anybody except for Dr. Mancuso and the guy who bought the Alvar property. That's it. That's it. That's all we know. And we know that Dr. Mancuso rented it from her. We don't know of any other tenants of hers over a, 20-year period? From 39 to 59? No. Sorry. She reported that to you? Yes, she told me about that. Now, I don't know if that's the same place, if it's the same place or not, but that was the one house that she spoke about. Is the name Mrs. Beverly Richardson familiar to you? I've never heard of her. Mrs. Llewellyn Murret? I've never heard of her. Patricia Aarons? I've never heard of her. Herman Conway? No. Thomas W. Turner? I've never heard of him. Okay, so hang on a second. I don't know any of these names. What are these names? God damn it. You know, I go to fucking Control S and fucking copy or do a screenshot and it just copies the whole fucking thing. I swear to God, Macs piss me off so bad sometimes. Unfortunately, PCs are even fucking worse. All right, so all these names here. I'm familiar with Beverly Richardson, Llewellyn Murret. I don't know Patricia Aarons, Herman Conway, or Thomas W. Turner. God fucking damn it. If this thing fucking copies one more time, I'm going to fucking end the show. All right, fuck it. While Mr. Ekdahl was living with her, of course, he was supporting the family. But after he left, that was when support was left up to her. Is that right? What? Said Mrs. Murret. She had to support the family when Mr. Ekdahl left. Is that right? That's right. She got some assistance from her sons, did she? Well, I think Robert was working at a supermarket and she had to make him give her his salary. And I don't know whether John was in the Coast Guard at the time or not. I think don't think he contributed anything, John, but I don't know. Was it your impression that about the time she was becoming increasingly despondent with life? I wouldn't say that. She seemed to be a person, or rather, she was a person who adjusted very easily to situations. She adjusted easily. She knew she had something about these things, that she had to get out and work and so forth to buy these boys things that they needed to keep them going. Of course, I guess it was hard naturally. It's hard for any woman, you know, to try to support 3 boys, and I don't think they ever appreciate what you do for them. What makes you say that? Well, she told me that the boys weren't helping out. I mean, John, you know, I don't know if John was married, right, or not, but I don't think he was helping out at home at all. If it had been my son, I know he would have stayed with me. He wouldn't have run out. Of course, maybe John had a family and maybe he couldn't help. I don't know. Did she talk to you about that or seem despondent because her children didn't help her? Yes, she told me about it. Now, after Robert got married, she stayed with Robert for a while, but I think there was a little friction between herself and his wife or something. I don't know about that except what she told me. Of course, there are always 2 sides to every story. I don't know. You can only repeat what one party tells you. In a way, I don't think those children showed the proper respect for their mother, and I don't think that's right, regardless of the hard time she was having raising them, because I guess she was a little demanding on them at times, and I think the children should have proper respect for their parents. I know no matter what my children did, I would still love them. Mr. Murret's a good family man, too, and there's nothing he wouldn't do for his children. And I have heard him tell them that no matter what happens, don't you ever talk about anybody's mother and things like that. Was it during this period before she moved to New York that she told you she had, as you put it, trained Lee to stay in the house? Well, I don't know exactly when you would say that was, but I think that's one reason why I know that Lee was so quiet. He was so much by himself without playing with other children. She did tell me that she told Robert to come right home from school and things like that because she thought it would be safer than being outside playing. But I don't know exactly when it was she was telling me that. I think she was I think that while she were living over in Fort Worth, but anyway, she was having a hard time of it over there, and she either wrote or called me. I don't remember which any, but I told her that I would help her out to send Lee down here for a while, and she sent Lee by train over here, and the train was about 2 hours late. Where did he come from that time in Texas? Yeah, from Texas. Yes, sir. I asked him, I said, Lee, you didn't meet anyone on the train? Did you talk to anyone? And he said, no, I didn't talk to anybody. My mother told me not to talk to anybody. Of course, that's a good thing sometimes, not to talk to strangers, but I guess that was one of the reasons he was so much by himself. Anyway, he stayed with us for a while. How long? About 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe more, until she got on her feet, and we took Lee out to ball games and bought him things, and we tried to make him happy, but it seemed like he just didn't want to get out of the house. I mean, he wouldn't go out and play. He would just rather stay in the house and read or something. He wouldn't want to go out and play with other children? No, he wouldn't. We didn't have a television, even though I had a husband. My sister always seemed to have more than I had. She was working, and somehow she had an automobile and television and things like that I didn't have. It was years after television had come out before we had one. We did have a radio, and Lee would take it in the back room and listen to the radio and read. He would read funny books, and I would try to get him to go outside and play with other children, but he wouldn't go out. So finally, I just made him get out, and so he did for a day or so, but then he came right back in and would go right back to reading and listening to the radio, and I practically pushed him out again because I didn't think it was healthy for him to stay in the house all the time, just to stay in that room by himself. But finally, I decided that was what he wanted, that was his way of life, and that he wanted to do, and there was only so much I could do about it. We took him out after that, but he didn't seem to enjoy himself. So finally, I told her to come and get him, that we didn't like for him to be there anymore because we had tried all we could do for him. Now, maybe she thought we didn't like him, but that wasn't it. It was just that he wouldn't go out and play, and he wanted to be alone in that room all the time, and he wouldn't even talk to other children, and he was so very obviously unhappy. But anyway, she came down to get him, in fact, and he told her to come get him. So let me pause right here. Why is this? Why is he behaving like this? Okay. Why does he want to isolate himself from other children and just, go in and read books and stuff? I think it's because he's hard of hearing in his ear because he had that surgery. I think this is what is the root cause of his being withdrawn. I think that's what molded his personality. We don't have any absolute, proof of this, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. The only thing that I can't seem to really grasp is how he got into the Marines, being hard of hearing in one ear, unless he faked it or they, pushed him through, or who the hell knows what. All right, let me continue. Mr. Jenner says, how do you know that? Well, because I saw the letter. He wrote a letter to ask her to come and get him. Yes, I wasn't supposed to see the letter, but I did. You saw the letter before it was mailed? Yes, sir. And he expressed in that letter some discomfort in being at your home, did he? Oh, one thing real quick. I just realized this. Diana, if you're listening, I just realized we don't know what time frame this is. So if you could help me figure out what time frame Miss Murret's talking about having Lee for a couple weeks, I'd appreciate it. And he expressed in that letter some discomfort at being at your home, did he? Yes. And he was under the impression that you didn't like him. I guess so, because he wrote and told her nobody around there liked him, and here everyone was knocking themselves out for him. Where was your sister living at the time? In Fort Worth? I think so, yes. On the occasion that she came from New York and stopped off in New Orleans, did she stay with you for a few days? Well, she stayed with me until she found an apartment. That was at your home at 757 French Street. Yes, sir, and that address was changed to 809 French Street. How was that? Well, it was the same house, but they changed the numbering of the block, that it was the same residence. They changed it to the 700 block. So she screwed up here. She changed it to the 700 from the 800 block. So it used to be 809 French, and then it went to 757 French. Well, it was the same house, but they changed the numbering of the block, but it was the same residence. They changed it to the 700 block. And how long did she stay with you on that occasion, talking about Marguerite? Well, it must have been about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. She was looking for a place to stay, and Robert was coming out of the service. You see, her testimony is all fucked up because this timing here. And as soon as I finish this paragraph, I'll explain it. Well, that must have been 2 weeks, 3 weeks. She was looking for a place to stay, and Robert was coming out of the service, and so that's when she found a place over on Exchange Alley. Okay, we got 3 different timelines going on here in one sentence. And that's before Robert came in, and she met Robert at my house, and they went right over to the apartment at Exchange Alley that she had found, but Robert left. He wouldn't stay in New Orleans. See, so she's contradicting herself here again. So let me stop here. All right, so right after it was changed, this is about the timing. The timing of the change to the 700 block was in 1953. Okay, so it was in 1953, and she's saying that Marguerite came and stayed with her for 2 or 3 weeks while she was looking for a place, and then Robert was there, and they went right over to Exchange Alley. Okay, we have a major problem here because Robert didn't get out of the service till July 55, but they were in Exchange Alley in January of 54. Okay, so Robert did correct himself during his testimony. He's saying he went there when he got out of the Marines, but he also went there for a visit. He corrected himself and said that he went there for a visit in January of 54. But see, we have two conflicting stories now. We have the story of Robert coming into Exchange Alley. This is all in today's episode from like the last 3 paragraphs, right? The contradictions are overwhelming. So she says that Robert comes in the previous paragraph that Robert came, got her, and they all went back to Texas. Okay, that didn't happen until July of 56. But she's saying Robert here came in and they went over to the place in Exchange Alley. This is obviously when Robert came in January of 1954. So she's all fucked up on her timelines, remember? But also, we have additional problems because this is the time period that we have paperwork that says he was at Beauregard during that September semester. During that September semester, despite the fact the paperwork says that he entered on the 14th of January during that semester, we have the evidence that he was there in the previous semester. So, yeah, once again, Lillian Murret doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. He wouldn't stay in New Orleans. He went back, so that was 56. Had to have been 56. How many days were you looking for an apartment? So there has to be minimum 3 times that Robert went to New Orleans in reference to Marguerite and Lee. So basically what you have is him visiting them in January 54 from the Marines when he's on leave, and he goes to the Exchange Alley place and he stays with them there. Clearly Harvey. Okay. And then because you don't have Lee and Marguerite showing up until May of 54 when they move into Myrtle Evans' place, right? Myrtle and Julian Evans' place at 1454 and 1452 St. Mary's. So remember, we have that big gap there. So her testimony here isn't clearing things up at all. It's making things worse. How many days were you looking for an apartment for her? Well, I would say about a week until she found this place on Exchange Alley. That's right. What was Lee doing during this time? He was going to school. When they came back from New York and stopped at your home and lived with you temporarily, did he go to school? Yes, he did. That's when she enrolled him in Beauregard Junior High School. Would that have been in January of 54? I don't know. Well, they left New York City, I think, on either the 5th or 7th of January 54. I believe it was the 7th because they talked to her on the 6th. So now we have an address here in New Orleans of 1464. It's actually 54. I hate how they fucking do this. They just fucking change the numbers. 1464 St. Mary. And Mrs. Murret goes, oh, that was before the Exchange place. She rented that from this lady who was a friend of hers. Was that Myrtle Evans? Yes, Myrtle Evans. She was a friend of hers. Mr. Jenner says, I believe she also lived there for a time at 1910 Britannia, didn't she? Okay, let me stop right here. This is fucking super important. Super important. Because we have a couple things. I looked up this address, 1910 Britannia. We've never heard of this 1910 Britannia address anywhere ever. Right? This is not an address. It's on the list of addresses. At all. For Marguerite Oswald. Hell, it's not even in my list. In my presentation, I forgot to add it. 1910 Britannia. Okay? And then what does Miss Murret say? She says, I think that's right. I'm not sure about those different places. I mean, she would move from one place to another, and she was at several places up before she went to Exchange. So now she's saying she went to a couple places before she went to Exchange. But we have absolute proof that Oswald was living at Exchange Place in January of 54. We know this for fact. That's why her testimony here is so fucked up. Because she's saying that she went to Myrtle Evans' place first in May of 54. But she's not saying it's May of 54, but that's the reality of it. Okay? So everything about her testimony is dog shit. Right? She's mixing up the two Marguerites and where they lived at what time. Okay? Because both of the Marguerites and both Lees, Lee and Harvey, both lived at Exchange Place. They did the swap-a-roo when after Lee Oswald lived at Myrtle Evans' place on St. Mary. Then they moved out of there and they went to Exchange Place. But Harvey Oswald and the fake Marguerite were living at Exchange Place before that. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's goddamn accurate. So the Exchange Place, I can't emphasize it to you enough, the Exchange Place address probably deserves a whole fucking book unto itself. Simply because the connection to the Loving Enterprises company and the Campbells, I think that was their name, Campbell, on the 10th floor of the 310 St. Charles, where the honorary Croatian embassy was. So somebody out there needs to dig into the honorary Croatian embassy that existed in New Orleans in 1954 on the 10th floor of the St. Charles building. Okay, there's a definite connection there, and there's a definite connection with these Campbells. Okay, so I'll get to it by the time my book comes out, but yeah, so 126 Exchange Place, I can't emphasize to you enough how fucked up everything there is. Everything. So, now let me continue. But this Britannia address. Myrtle Evans lived on Britannia. Okay. Myrtle Evans Britannia was a street that was perpendicular. It was a cross street of the St. Mary address. And so it was right up the road. But here, Mr. Jenner is suggesting that Marguerite lived there at some time. But this address has never turned up on any list for Marguerite's addresses, despite the fact that Mr. Jenner is talking about it. So explain fucking that one. That was before Exchange Place. She rented that from this lady who was a friend of hers. Was that Myrtle Evans? Yes, Myrtle Evans. She was a friend of hers. I believe she also lived for a time at 1910 Britannia, didn't she? I think that's right. I'm not sure about those different places. I mean, how she would move from one place to another, but she was at several places up there before she went to Exchange Place. Well, we appear from our records to have them living on St. Mary Street in New Orleans in May or June of 54 until about February of 55. Well, I don't know anything about that. I know Myrtle Evans was managing that apartment where she lived. Do you know how it was that she went to live at 126 Exchange Place in New Orleans? Yes. Was that in 1954 or 1955? I don't know. Whatever you have down there is probably the right year. But they lived at Myrtle's house first. Could it have been that Myrtle Evans lived in the spring of 1954 at 1454 St. Mary Street? I don't know. Maybe that's right. I know this was a very old house where she lived. I was told that she had a family home, Myrtle, and that she had renovated it into a lot of apartments for tenants. How long did she stay at your house? At my house? Yes. Well, like I said, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the most, somewhere in there. And you're pretty sure that they moved directly from your house into this place on Exchange Alley? Well, either there or to Myrtle's apartment. I don't know which, to be truthful with you. Bitch, you wouldn't know truthful if it was fucking choking you to death. Now tell me about Lee Harvey Oswald during the couple of weeks that he spent at your house. Did you notice any change in him from the time you had known him previously? He would now have been about 3 years older. Isn't that right? Yes, sir. Like I said, they had just come down from New York, and she had told me about him not wanting to go to school, but she enrolled him over at not wanting to go to school, but she enrolled him over at Beauregard, which wasn't too far from my house. It's a school on Canal Street, and it's just a few blocks after you get off the bus from Lakeview. So she enrolled him there, and she gave him my address for the school. And I think, or I'm quite sure, that while he was living there and having trouble with some of the boys at school. Now, will you tell me about that? Just tell me what you're referring to with the relation at the school. Well, I can tell you only what I was told. I don't know anything myself that happened, but I can tell you what he told me, or what he told her of what happened. He said they were calling him Yankee and so forth, names like that. And this one time he got into the bus and he sat in a seat in the Negro section, which he didn't know because he had just come from New York and he didn't know that they sat in special seats. So he just got on the bus and sat where he could. The bus stopped in front of the school and you can hardly get a seat anyway. So he just ran to the bus and jumped on and got a seat, like I said, in the Negro section. And the boys jumped him at the end of the line. They jumped on him and he took them all on. And of course they beat him up. And so he came home and that was the end of that. And he didn't say anything to me about that. Another time they were coming out of school at 3 o'clock and there were boys in back of him. And one of them called him his name and he said, Lee. And when he turned around, this boy punched him in the mouth and ran. And his tooth went through his lip. And so he had to go over to the school to take him to the dentist. And I paid for the dentist bill myself. And that's all I know about. And he was not supposed to have started any of that at that time. Now, at that Beauregard school at that time, they had a very low standard. And I had no children going there and never did. Well, your daughter taught there. My children went to Jesuit High and Loyola University, but they did have a very bad bunch of boys going to Beauregard, and they were always having fights and ganging up on boys, and I guess Lee wouldn't take anything, so he got in several scraps like that. These were things that Mrs. Oswald told you, is that right? Yes, most of it, except when he was in my home, I observed the way he acted. He was a lonely boy most of the time, I think. Hang on a second. Let me back the fuck up here. All right, so he gets punched in the mouth. The tooth gets knocked out. They don't mention that, but the tooth gets knocked out. We have the picture. That's in the 54-55 school year. It's Lee Oswald, not Harvey Oswald. And she's kind of saying that she paid for the dentist. He had to go over to the school and take him to the dentist, and I paid for the dentist bill myself, and that's all I know about that. Well, why would she pay for the dentist bill herself? Why? Was he living in her house at the time? No need to. We know that they have records of them being at 126 Exchange, basically from January 54 all the way up until July of 56, 2.5 years. So this doesn't make any sense to me, the whole dentist thing where she paid for it. She has way more knowledge of fucking Lee than she should. Way more. Why is that? Why is she so intimately connected to Lee's life as a child? Why? And why does she downplay it later in life? Knowing that she was in on this Harvey Lee deception and that she was the woman allegedly at 126 Exchange Place, that was actually her house, that John Armstrong screwed up and said that she was the woman in the picture was the false Marguerite. Now, he got that all wrong, right? But still, it doesn't change the fact that she was involved in the deception. It was Lillian Murret who was identified by Palmer McBride. Okay? That's the biggest crack in this Palmer McBride shit ever made, next to Armstrong's work. Because he thought that was the false Marguerite and Harvey Oswald. Not true. Not true whatsoever. Couldn't have been. Couldn't have been at all, because I've been able to successfully detangle Oswald's time in Corregidor. And so that completely removes the possibility that it was that particular Oswald, Harvey Oswald, at Pfister Dental Labs. Couldn't have been. And so just the fact alone that it was Lillian Murret, who was staying next to the Senator Hotel when she allegedly had a house, who was the one identified by Palmer McBride. See, these are important pieces of the puzzle. And that that picture of Lillian Murret that I've showed, that you'll see again in my presentation coming up on the 22nd, of Dorothea, or was it Marilyn Dorothea Murret, and her mother Lillian. And there's a kid with his arm around Lillian on the couch with tight curls and a hairline that looks just like Oswald from Beauregard. So I don't know what the fuck is going on, but I'm pretty goddamn convinced at this point that one of the Murret children was the one working at Pfister. Probably John, the youngest one. He was the same age, and his hairline is identical to the Beauregard photograph of a kid who barely looks like Lee Oswald. Barely. But that photograph of the three of them sitting on the couch, I thought that was Oswald for fucking ever. The last 10 years of my life, I thought that was Oswald until about a week ago. When I realized it wasn't Oswald, I was like, holy shit, this guy has almost an identical look to Oswald at that time. He did. He fucking did. So there's some shenanigans going on big time with Lillian Murret, her kids, Marguerite Oswald, and her kids. There's fucking, and throw naval intelligence in there. There's something going on here. This is the core of it. This is the core of the Lee and Harvey deception, and it revolves around Marguerite and Lillian Murret. Period. I mean, I've concluded this without exception. So, let me move on. Your children were all entered in school, were they? Yes. And did they study pretty hard? Oh, yes. Did you have the impression that Lee Harvey was doing well in school, or what was your feeling along that line? I think he was doing very poor work in school most of the time. Then he got to the point where he just didn't think he ought to have to go to school, and that seemed to be his whole attitude. And when I mentioned that to Marguerite, that seemed to be the beginning of our misunderstanding. She didn't think her child could do anything wrong, and I could see that he wasn't interested in going to school, because I have had children of my own going to school, and they always had done real well with their grades. They actually seemed to like school, but I can't say that Lee ever showed that he ever liked school. When he came with his mother from New York, did he ever discuss anything with you relative to his trip to New York? No, he never said anything. But my sister told me about the time that that they had to take him out of the apartment when she was working and put him in that place, and she had to get a lawyer to get him out. All right. Now, this boy was about 14 years of age at that time. Is that right? After they returned from New York and stayed at your place? Yes. And the next I heard, when he came here, and he didn't go to school because he thought he already knew all they had to teach him. So they must have allowed him to go work for Tshirt because he had a job as a runner going from building to building, delivering messages and things like that. That was in 1955. Would that be about right? When he was here? Yes. Did this boy come over to visit you occasionally when they were living in Exchange Alley? Yes, he did. Before he got the job at Tshirt, he liked seafood, you see, and he used to come over from school on a Friday afternoon to get his Friday dinner because he knew I always cooked seafood on Friday, so he always came on Friday, and then he would come again on Saturday morning, and I would give him money to rent a bike at City Park, and, he thought that was one of the greatest things he could do, and he was very happy riding a bike up in City Park. My children had a bike, but it seemed like he wanted to go up in the park rather than ride their bicycles, and sometimes I would have to get my children back or something, and I would have to give him more money so that he could keep his bike another hour. Now, when he was going to Beauregard, Joyce, one of my daughters who lives in Beaumont, Texas? Okay, Diana, Joyce lived in Beaumont. I don't know if we've talked about that yet. Yes, sir. Well, I don't think Joyce was married then. I can't think whether she was or not, but anyway, we went to the store and we bought Lee a lot of clothes and that we thought he might need, so he would look presentable to go to school, whatever a boy needs. And when we gave him to him, he said, well, why are you doing all this for me? And we said, well, Lee, for one thing, we love you. And another thing, we want you to look nice when you go to school like the other children. So that was that. Did he wear his clothes to school? Oh, yes, he wore the clothing that we bought him. Did he say anything else with regard to your purchasing this clothing for him? All right, let me pause because I'm having angst. God, I live in a permanent state of angst if you haven't figured it out yet. So here's the problem with this. They're fucking close, right? This is how close they are. He comes over every Friday and Saturday. He gets seafood, and on Saturday he goes to the park. She gives him money. She buys him clothes. What are the implications here? One, it's her kid. That's an implication, okay? Probably not, but it's a possibility. We can't rule it out knowing she's a fucking lying cunt at this point. So, also, it's implying that she realizes that Marguerite is a horrible person. Okay? So here we are. Marguerite Oswald, 1955. How many houses did she own in 55? Well, she owned the Ewing Street house, I think. I don't think she sold that yet. She had the Birchwood house or Birchman, whichever one that was. That one didn't sell yet. So this woman, God, the more I learn about Marguerite Oswald, the more I realize how much of an absolute fucking horrible person she was. Really. So, yeah. So the point is, Lillian Murret is much closer to Lee all throughout his early life than she lets on, right? This brings up a good point. He came to the house so often at this time, right? But in 1963, Oswald shows up in New Orleans and he goes door to door looking for the Murret house on French Street. Why would he do that? Why would Oswald go door to door looking for a house that he spent much of his youth in? Not because they changed the fucking numbers. No. No. It's because it was Harvey Oswald who had never been there before. Right? It's an indicator Harvey Oswald never went to that house, and only Lee did. Which would kind of be an indication that Harvey didn't know Lillian. Right? Couldn't have known Lillian. Well, I guess he could have. It would have been possible. Would have been possible while he was living in Exchange Place before Lee and his mother moved in there. Hard to say. Needs more fleshing out. All right, Mr. Jenner then says, do you think that a little of his independence might have rubbed off from his mother in the light of your experiences with your sister? Well, she was independent herself, all right. She didn't think she needed anybody either, so I guess he sort of got that from her. But I know that there are times when we always always need somebody. And if you don't have somebody to turn to, then you don't know what to do sometimes. I would hate to feel that I never needed anybody. Did Lee seem to have that propensity that when you did things for him, that he didn't seem to want you doing anything for him? I don't think he seemed to be very appreciative for anything you did for him. Now I will say this, at the time he was receiving something like these clothes, he did seem to be very happy about it, but it didn't last any time, and he never would put it in words, at least. We were probably the only people that he knew as relatives. I don't think he knew anyone else in the family. In the Oswald family, do you mean? In the Oswald family or any other family? I mean, we were the only ones he knew, and I got to know him pretty well since I took care of him while she had the 2 other boys in this place after she gave birth to Lee. But along with him, I had these 5 children of my own to take care of, and I had a colored girl working for me. Oh, I need to identify the name of the colored girl. When John was born, I had a child that was just a few months older than John Edward, but I gave her my girl for weeks, and I was struggling along with my 5, and a baby the same age as she had, I tried to do all I could to help her. All right. This is a lot to unpack in this paragraph, so we're going to unpack this paragraph. I'm probably knock out another page, and we're going to call it for today, because I have to ponder some of this stuff. Shit, we only made it like through 2 pages or something like that. But in the Oswald family or any other family, I mean, we were the only ones he knew, and I got to know him pretty well since I took care of him while she had the other 2 boys in this place. So we know what years we're talking about. We're talking about 41, 42, 43, right? Marguerite Oswald, I'm convinced, is in New York. I know she's in New York. She's in New York. The 2 kids are in the home, and Lee is with her. That's the time period she's talking about. And then when John was born, I had a child. So she's jumping back in time to 1932. When John was born, I had a child that was just a few months older than John Edward, but I gave her my girl for a few weeks. I gave her my girl for a few weeks, and I was struggling along with my 5 and a baby the same age as she had, I tried to do all I could to help her. This is confusing me. When John was born, I had a child that was just a few months older than John Edward, but I gave her my girl for weeks, and I was struggling along with my 5 and a baby the same age as she had, I tried to do all I could to help her. Okay. All right. God, she jumps around so much in her testimony, timeline-wise. It's crazy. So she says here, God, I'm going to read this again. When John was born, I had a child that was just a few months older than John Edward. So we're talking 1932. But I gave her my girl for weeks. Must be talking about Marilyn Murret, who was born in 1928. And I was struggling along with my 5 and a baby, with my 5 and a baby the same age she had, I was struggling along with my 5 and a baby the same age she had, What is she talking about? What the hell is she talking about? She is, in 2 sentences, she covered a span from 1932 to 1955. Okay? This has to be anti-interrogation training, man. Has to be. Her level of deflection and jumping timelines, this is all has to be what... I need to get with somebody who took a course on anti-interrogation training and come to understand exactly what the fuck they teach you in there. I know they teach you to control your eyes. Because when you do like Reed Institute, kinesthetic interview, stuff like that, it's 100% based on people's natural reactions to questions on how they move their eyes. So if I ask you a question, we had a technique when I was a cop. You could ask somebody a bunch of questions, and you can tell by the direction they move their eyes whether they're lying to you or not, right? So, yeah, all that stuff is taught in anti-interrogation training, which I promise you Miss Murret went through. Would you recognize Lee's handwriting if you saw it? I don't say that I would. I may have expressed it before, but I thought he had very childish handwriting, and he did. Did you see his handwriting often? Only at the time he was going to Beauregard School with his homework. Without noticing that you have Commission Exhibit number 540 before you, do you recognize that handwriting? Wait till I get my glasses. All right, take your time. I couldn't say I recognized it. It looks a little like something like his handwriting. I mean, the way he would write, but I couldn't say for sure. I couldn't swear that it was his writing. You couldn't swear that he wrote this? No. Does it look like what you recall his handwriting was? Well, if it's anything, it's even a little better than I knew him to write, I might say. Okay, let me tell you what's going on here. She's probably seeing Lee's writing, but because Lee had better handwriting than Harvey did. I never thought he wrote very well for his age, and he was 14 then, you know. Of course, a lot of boys don't write good. Girls, you will find, are better at penmanship than boys. You ought to see my son's writing. He graduated from law school, and he don't write good either. Now, I think he was left-handed. Now, you've caused me complications, Mrs. Murret. So she says, I think he was left-handed, but we have the picture from Beauregard where it shows him with a pen in his right hand. So he's not left-handed, okay? All the talk about Lee being left-handed is distraction. Now, you've caused me complications, Mrs. Murret. Commission Exhibit 540 has a series of pages which are numbered at the bottom 148 through 157, both inclusive, purporting to be photostatic copies of a diary or the memoirs of Lee Harvey Oswald, written in his hand and found by Irving, Texas police and the city of Dallas police, or at least certainly by the city of Dallas police in his room. Yeah, so now we're talking about Harvey Oswald. She's got the handwriting of Harvey Oswald in front of her, which is crazy because I thought Lee's was nicer handwriting than Harvey's, because Harvey's looked like a child all the way till he was an adult. Well, here's one that says that he was, you see, when he stopped in that Saturday, you know, we didn't know where he was going, but he said he was going to be stationed at Keesler Field. Is that Keesler Field, Biloxi? Yes, but someone else said that they thought that when he came to my house on that Saturday, when he stopped there, that he was coming from Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, let me pause right here. There's no reason for Lee to ever have been to fucking Atlanta. Ever. 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 Okay? To go from Biloxi, Mississippi to Atlanta, Georgia, and then to go to New Orleans? No, don't think so. Unless there's some shenanigans, which we always know this shenanigans are afoot. Yes, but someone else said they thought he'd come from Atlanta that day. But anyway, we took Lee to lunch that day and then dropped him off, if I remember, by the custom house up here by the river. And that's all I remember about that. And I never saw him anymore until after he turned up in Russia. After he defected to Russia. Yes, sir. I told him, I said, Lee, if you're going to be stationed over there, you can come over on weekends. Did he say he was going to be stationed there at Keesler Field? Yes. Yes, he said he was going to be. And that's over at Biloxi, Mississippi. Yes, sir. But he never did come over and see us, and he never did write. I asked him to write, but he didn't write. And I never heard any more from him. I didn't even know that he was back from Russia. And you didn't even know he'd gone to Russia either, is that right? That's right. I didn't even know he'd gone over there at all. I didn't know until after he went. How did you learn he was in Russia? Did his mother tell you he was in Russia? That he had defected, yes. That he was it was about the time she had this accident, I remember, and then he got out of the Marines. Now that was before he defected, right? Yes, that was before he went to Russia. He got out of the Marines and he came to see her, and he had all the money, and he didn't give her any of it. I don't think, but $10. I think he gave her $10 of it, she told me. And then he left supposedly to come to New Orleans. So she thought, and so I didn't hear from her anymore until she learned by him from a letter that he was in Russia. So she told you that, is that right? She told me, yes, sir. All right, let me call it there. We're getting off the beaten path from what I wanted to focus on today. So we'll pick this up next time. Just so everybody's aware, like, I'm not getting to Russia till after I finish this book. We'll get on Russia in about a year and a half, 2 years. And it'll take me from there another 2 years to write the Russia book. And then once I finish that, I will write the absolute definitive book on Oswald's activities from the time he came back from the Soviet Union until the end. And so that's the plan, with a couple documentaries stuck in the middle. So February 22nd, I'm going to be on the AM Wake Up channel, and I will, or Slow News Day, one of the two, and I will be doing it's going to be 4 to 6 hour presentation on my 433 slide presentation on Harvey Oswald. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. I'll be back on a couple days, and I appreciate your tuning in.